This week on Aliens Explored, we will be looking into the life and times of George Knapp, a multi-award-winning investigative journalist who, among other things, interviewed Bob Lazar, whose claims to have worked on reverse engineering crashed UFO technology at Area 51 we have covered extensively in at least one of our earlier episodes. George also brought to light the mysterious happenings at Skinwalker Ranch, owned by his employer, Robert Bigelow. This episode of Aliens Explored is dedicated to our Explorer of the Week, DEE NANDWANI. Dee has subscribed to our Patreon and helps us keep on doing what we do. Check out our Patreon at patreon.com/Aliens Explored and find a tier that suits your budget.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a skeptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Welcome back, listeners, to Aliens Explored, your weekly podcast, plus a little bit more on occasion. We've had a few specials out lately, but yes, your weekly podcast where we look at aliens, UFOs, UAPs, the people who study them, and all kinds of other stuff. I'm one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I'm your other host, Neil Kelly.
How are you doing, Neil?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh. Yes. I'm much better after my. Well, it won't be that recent when this goes out, but my recent experiences
at the time of recording, it was a week ago?
At the time of recording, just over a week ago. We're recording on the Monday, and this was the a week Saturday before when it happened. When it happened,
the event, the size. Now, in terms of close encounters, what kind was it? If you put a number on it,
using the official classification system, I would count it if it actually was a close encounter, because that's a big question mark. Then it would be of the third kind.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
How many different kinds?
Speaking of close encounters, I think you're having a close encounter. I can see on my screen in front of me. I saw something behind you moving about. It's gone now. Yeah, it's gone now.
Are you just trying to wind me up?
No, genuinely, there it is again. Oh no, it's your pen. I actually thought it was Scaramanga's tail.
I can see that. Yeah, just twiddling my pen.
Okay.
Because it did go through my mind, because we are still little boys at heart, for me to suddenly say, "Oh shit, Stu, look out behind you!" While you were still in your rattled state, because that's what kids do, isn't it? So that's why I didn't do it, because at my advanced stage, I think I'm beyond that sort of thing now.
I do still. You didn't.
I do still scan the room behind you. I do still think, oh, what's that in the corner of the screen? Is that? Oh no, it's just a bit of wire or something.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's still an element with me. I'm still a little unsettled. I'm way less unnerved than I was previously. So, Yeah. If any of our listeners are wondering what the hell we're talking about, then go back and look at our special episode about my encounter. It's all there for you to either listen to, or you can watch it on our YouTube channel. It's an interesting one, and we're going to be doing a follow-up to that. In fact, just after we finish recording this episode, we're going to be speaking to Ben from Central Utah Paranormal. Looking forward to that and getting his thoughts on the whole thing. So it's probably going to come out the other way. So I think the interview with Ben is going to come out before this episode, but it's all there for you to look at.
So it's all there for you to look at already. So, yeah, okay. Two
there
parts.
We go. Anyway, we're talking today about something rather more terrestrial, or should I say someone, George Knapp. Who,
yes.
If you haven't heard of him, you'll have heard about things associated with him, definitely. You must have come across the name in doing these podcasts, Neil.
Not in these podcasts, but I have come across him before. I recognise his picture. He's an American television investigative journalist, a news anchor. I think I've seen him on reporting various things, and a talk show host. Highly regarded, been recognised by the Edward R. Murrow Awards, the Peabody Awards, and 24 Pacific Southwest Regional Emmy Awards. So, so he's a big deal. But he also
really is
reported on the story of Bob Lazar, who claimed to have worked on UFOs, extraterrestrials, at Area 51.
Yeah. So George is probably best known for being a talk radio host on Coast to Coast. This is an American late night radio channel. I think it runs from like 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. That's in Eastern time. And Coast to Coast is like, it's basically dedicated paranormal conspiracy stuff.
Well, and also very concerned with animal welfare.
Oh, George Knapp personally is. Coast to Coast is not. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, George Knapp. I mean, he was basically a standard investigative journalist. Yeah, doing okay for himself, but not connected in any way with the paranormal until, as you rightly say, he came across the Bob Lazar story. And in fact, he was, I don't think he broke the Bob Lazar story, but I think he was the first person to do an in-depth interview with Bob, or it was something along those lines. He certainly was he was instrumental in getting Bob's story out there. Absolutely, definitely. So Bob Lazar. We did an episode of one of our earliest episodes. We ought to revisit that, perhaps. On
his Wikipedia page, Bob Lazar, or Robert Scott Lazar, is described as an American conspiracy theorist and self-proclaimed physicist, who says he was hired in the late 80s to reverse engineer alien technology at Area 51, or as it's called, S4.
So we went into a lot of that. I don't know if you remember that. That was like nearly 3 years ago now.
Was it really? Blimey.
Yeah, it's when we talked about it, and we disputed back then as to whether or not his credentials were genuine. That's a good one to go back and listen to, listeners. I'll give you the exact episode number. It was episode 3. So, it was one of our very, very first to go out. Went out on 31st of July 2020. Yeah, nearly 3 years ago. Yes. So that's kind of what broke, or what accelerated George into the world of the paranormal.
Yeah, I mean, he did say that he's an investigative journalist. He discovered evidence which corroborated some of Lazar's claims and said they should be taken more serious than what he called typical UFO fare. But also, to his eternal shame, he also published the claims of a conspiracy theorist called Milton William Cooper, who's considerably less credible.
Okay, no, I'm not familiar with him.
Okay, he's a guy with a very, very shady background. He's a conspiracy theorist. He described the HIV/AIDS as a man-made disease used to target blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals, and that the cure was created before it was released. He claimed to have served the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, and Naval Intelligence, but public records say he only did a period in the Navy with a rating of E5 or sergeant, which will be a petty officer, second class in the Royal Navy. He did serve in Vietnam, got 2 service medals, and he did serve on work for Naval Intelligence. But he expanded the speculations of earlier conspiracies by incorporating government involvement with extraterrestrials as a central theme. George Knapp said it was to his eternal shame that he publicised Milton William Cooper's claims.
Okay, so he made a mistake and he held up his hands about it. That's what I'm taking from that.
But it does highlight the dangers. I think a particular one that I'm always aware of, that you get something officially from the government says something, you decide that for whatever reason you don't entirely believe it, or you don't believe it at all. And the next thing you know, you're forming a conspiracy, and these conspiracies join together. I mean, we know about QAnon, which kind of joins. It's an all-encompassing conspiracy-based view of the entire world. And the next thing you know, you're giving credence to someone like Bill Cooper, who says, well, HIV/AIDS, of course, was released by the American military or whoever to kill blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals. That's and the world's flat, and if you can't get a girlfriend, you should kill people and that sort of thing, and don't wear a mask and don't get vaccinated because it's all a conspiracy. And no
Bill Gates will control you through microchips.
Yeah, that sort of thing. That's where you kind of start circling that plug hole as soon as you decide that something you've been told officially isn't true.
It's a difficult one, and I
get in the case of some governments we've had recently in the US and Britain, you get into conspiracy theories if you decide that what they're saying is true, because we've had prime ministers and presidents who are conspiracy theorists.
Yes.
So
it's, less so over here, I think, in the UK.
Probably less so, but they certainly, with the recent pandemic, we had a government that acted in such a way as to make people very sceptical about things like masks and vaccinations.
Oh yes,
yes, and absolutely. They certainly didn't act in a competent way.
Well, the people who donate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds to individual MPs are people who own things like chains of restaurants and chains of pubs. If you have a lockdown to save people's lives, then those restaurants and pubs aren't making any money. So they will put pressure on the people in whose pockets they are. Anyway, that's all. Yeah.
Well, yeah. What was it?
I feel very strongly about that.
What was the campaign that Rishi Sunak, then Chancellor, now Prime Minister,
Eat out to help out.
Eat out to help out. Yeah, go to a restaurant,
Yeah, eat out to help out.
So yeah, you do get into this kind of conspiracy thing, but obviously George Knapp found Bob Lazar very credible.
It did, and still to this day stands by his claims. Very
But we're
much
kind
so.
of I always get mixed up between Area Area 51 and Roswell. The two seem to be very closely linked in my mind, and I do sometimes wonder: was this at Area 51 or is this at Roswell? Are they anywhere near each other?
They're in British terms, no, they're a long way away. In American terms, they're on the doorstep of each other. They're like 1,000 miles away, I think, off the top of my head, something like that. Area 51 is. It's only recently that they've actually admitted Area 51 actually exists anyway. But it is essentially a nuclear missile testing ground. It is some distance away. They're both in, it's out Nevada way, as I believe is Roswell. But the reason it's associated most of all is it is claimed that that is where the crashed spaceship from Roswell was taken. Was Area 51.
So there's the connection.
Yes, that's at the heart of your connection. Now, other things have sprung up around that, but that's the bottom line with it. Yeah, so that's where a lot of that connection comes from. And of course, this is not the only time that that George Knapp is instrumental in bringing some pretty major, I'll say, paranormal, UFO-related events to the public's eye. So George Knapp was employed by a chap we've spoken about very recently on the podcast, Robert Bigelow, as part of his National Institute of Discovery Science.
And who bought Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes. Now, George Knapp, basically, if you've heard of Skinwalker Ranch, you've heard of it because of George Knapp.
Okay.
So, yeah, he's the one who essentially publicised Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, the locals all knew. There was a kind of lots of local legends about it, but it came into the public eye because specifically of George Knapp. Now, if you look at that from a bigger, wider angle, so Robert Bigelow, as you rightly say, he buys Skinwalker Ranch, or Sherman Ranch as it was then. He starts these investigations into the various paranormal things, and we've got a whole episode about Skinwalker Ranch where we talk about that. I'm sure we'll be talking about it again in the future. But Robert Bigelow starts these scientific investigations into it. Along comes the government, who says, we want you to work on our Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or ATIP, as it's called. And all of a sudden, everything about Skinwalker Ranch goes quiet. Everything from the National Institute of Discovery Science, nope, that's suddenly classified information. But here's the thing, here's the connection. Where we are now getting the government to admit quite freely that there are UAPs that can do things that human craft cannot do, that are being controlled by some external force, and they've admitted this freely, that wouldn't have happened were it not for the research and the notoriety of Skinwalker Ranch. So when you follow the chain back, it's because of George Knapp that we are in this almost to a point of disclosure now. So a very important guy.
Yeah.
Very important guy. You're smiling.
Yeah, I don't think we're close to disclosure. I think, I'm always. I mean, there is that kind of general rule, isn't it, about the media that if they start publishing if they suddenly make a big deal about something like UFOs or in Britain the royal family, that's when to start delving into what else is going on that they don't want to report on. What
There
are
is
they
an
covering up?
element of that, absolutely, and that does happen. But so it's fair to say that it's only been 3 years that you've been exposed to ufology with any real, in any meaningful way. Is that a fair thing to say?
I would say that's a fair one. Yeah, I mean, I've heard
So
of
I
them
can
before,
remember
but
like 20 years ago what things were like and how tight-lipped. Like it basically, if you came anywhere near any government formal announcements with UFOs, you would be utterly, utterly ridiculed. Now it's being taken seriously. Now we've got UN official. So the UN recently had a vote about whether or not they should set up a committee to investigate UAPs. And it was 25 voted in favour, 2 abstained, 1 was against. That would never have happened 20 years ago. Absolutely no chance.
no,
It
but
would
I
have
think
been laughed at.
I think 20 years ago, when someone said UFO, they meant flying saucer. That was you said, I've seen a UFO. You've actually seen a flying saucer and little green men, and yes, you'd be laughed at.
Yeah.
Now, when they say UFO, they say, well, it is just that. It's just something we couldn't identify. And in fact, we're even going to broaden the definition further. And we're not even going to suggest it was an object. We're going to call it an unidentified aerial phenomenon. It could be a trick of the light or atmospherics or something like that. There's something in the sky that we saw and we don't know what it is. And that's all we're saying.
It's a bit of a misconception that UAP is new terminology. It's not. It's been around for about 40 years.
But it's new to me.
It's new to you. Absolutely. It's new in the public usage, but it has been used for about 40 years by
it has
official...
been used, but yeah, it's much more widely used now. And when someone says they've seen a UAP, well, they're not. Some people don't say that, do they? They say, well, I saw something weird in the sky. I saw some weird lights in the sky. Don't know what. They're not going to get laughed at. They say, oh, where did you see them then? And they'll say, well, yeah, and they might describe it. And they'll say, "Oh, that sounds odd. Wonder what it was." And they can all speculate as to what it was, and probably not. Occasionally come to the conclusion, "Oh, it's definitely a visitor from another world."
But that's the point. So, in 20 years, we've gone from these things would have been. There's no way they would have been taken seriously. Anybody mentioning them would have been laughed at and ridiculed. To the government actually releasing footage. I mean, that's we're way down the road. A lot of people think disclosure is this binary thing that will go from one day government's denying everything to the following day they'll wake up and the governments have admitted that, yes, they're in contact with aliens, and that's how people picture disclosure as this very binary switch. It's not. It's going to be a ramped up process over decades. It'll take decades for it to get to a point whereby the government are actually admitting what's going on. And even then, will they fully admit it? That's a whole other thing. But we need to get out this mindset of disclosure being an on-off switch. It's really, really not. We're heading.
They're gonna butter you up. They're gonna sort of lead you by the hand gently towards it. But at some point, they're gonna say, "Yeah, you've got to make that final leap. That these things come from another dimension."
We're partway
been in
there,
touch.
though. By releasing the footage, by saying they are capable of manoeuvring in a way that we cannot replicate with human craft. They've said this.
But Yeah, but they said we still don't know what they are really.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But that is a massive step. Massive. An incredible step. It's something that many of us amongst the public have already known, so it might not feel like a massive step, but for a government to actually admit it and release the footage. And we've got George Knapp to thank for it.
But I also think there's a political dimension to this, that America, the United States, has a military and aerial superiority that it didn't have, for instance, during the Cold War. During the Cold War, when it suited them to describe the Soviet Union and even China as military rivals with similar technology, that, if we're going into all-out war, it's going to be 50-50. We'll suffer a lot. They're not prepared to admit that there's anything coming into our airspace that we don't know what it is. They want to tell the public, nothing gets in here without us knowing about it and being able to shoot it down. That's going to be part of it. And now that I think it's generally acknowledged that the United States has a military that goes way beyond anything anyone else has got. I mean, their military spending is more than the next 2, 3, or 4 countries all put together, isn't it? In terms of military spending, or the next top 10, that they can say, there's this stuff that we just don't know what it is. We shot it down anyway, but because that's what we do. That's our job.
That they don't have aerial superiority by saying there are these craft that just manoeuvre in a way that we can't keep up.
But that's what I mean. They're more happy to admit that they don't have aerial superiority because they can kind of dismiss out of hand the idea that maybe the Russians or the Chinese put something up there that's superior to anything we've got. We know that they don't have anything like that. And we can be pretty sure about it.
It's fine because it's not the commies.
Absolutely, yeah, it's fine. I mean, was it George Santos or someone like that? Who's the governor of Florida? It is Santos. I think it was George Santos.
I know Schwarzenegger last I remember.
Yeah. Oh, that's
California.
Yeah. He said, these reports of UFOs, what he's concerned about is that it might be a terrestrial enemy that's developed the capability of encroaching on US airspace. He's not too bothered about people from another dimension or another world.
That comes back to my point. 20 years ago, there wouldn't have been any question. Anything in the skies must be man-made. It's got to be. And they wouldn't tolerate the idea of anything else. Anyway, I think we've got a lot to thank George Knapp for, and I applaud him for it. It's not to say he doesn't have his decriers.
Of course,
hey,
he doesn't.
And if he can make his mistakes and admit to them and hold his hands up and say, I'm sorry I made a mistake, all credit to him for that. I respect that.
Yeah.
So there we go.
So here's to George Knapp,
Absolutely.
Feel free to get in touch if you feel you need to redress anything, George.
Oh, absolutely. Or get in touch. Just, we'd love to talk to you. Absolutely. And if you want to get in touch, George Knapp, or any of our listeners, you can get in touch with us via Facebook and Twitter by searching Aliens Explored. You can get in touch by commenting on one of our YouTube videos on our dedicated Aliens Explored YouTube channel. You can, if you're one of our Patreon subscribers, you get exclusive access to our Discord server, so you can chat to us through there, and of course with other like-minded people as well. There are links to all these things below, even our email address, aliensexplored@gmail.com. Join us next time when we're heading back in time again, Neil, to 74 BC this time.
Oh, really?
When we'll be visiting ancient Phrygia, or Asian Turkey as it's now known. We'll be looking
Phrygia.
at a Pythos-shaped UFO in Phrygia. That's right. 74 BC. We'll be chatting to some eyewitnesses. No, we won't. They'd be rather old by now. But we will be talking about that event, so you don't want to miss that one. In the meantime, keep watching Coast to Coast and anything you see George Knapp on, because we think he's a bloody nice bloke. And of course, keep watching the skies. Take care for now.
Bye-bye.
Aliens Explored is a Figo Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.